I have to say, I mean, as we've mentioned, this was my first time making an album. Ross, you and I had recorded once, Shiverlong 2, I think, also with Ryan. But this was the first time I was really doing a deep dive, and it was amazing, Nate, to have you there in the control room with us, just as somebody who's got such experience and such insight into these processes. I was actually a little skeptical about it, like walking in, and that has a little bit to do with how much I value liveness and that kind of the co-presence and that heightened human state of listening together with other people. But I was totally hypnotized once we started and really got addicted to the process. I'm really a composer who works with my hands, and when I'm investigating sound, it's just, it's 3 inches from my ear. It comes through my skin and through my arms, and so that's where I find the most satisfying detail. And with live performance, even through amplification, I just can't give that amount of fidelity to the audience. Even though you get the charge of togetherness, you lose a lot of that detail. That many good microphones, 3 inches from the cardboard box that Ross is digging into. And that's actually how I've always heard this music. It's how it came through me and how I wanted to put it out into the world. And I can't quite do that in the concert hall, and realized I really can in this studio context.
Those were some really, really fun days in the studio. And I think, Ash in particular has she has a very clear notation language, but also a really, really clear idea of what it should sound like. And, even with performers who really know her and know her music and know her language, there's never the perfect mark on the page to represent what's coming through the microphones and through the speakers. And so it was so important for her to be there, and to be able to respond to what she was hearing and tweak things. And, even to the, point of me, getting from her, what was or wasn't coming through the microphones, and then trying to move mic play. I mean, I remember very specifically with the Bode cardboard, with the Bode box, playing around with the mic placement to try to get just the right balance of low frequency and squeak, and that's all stuff I would never have had any concept of what was intended if she weren't there. And so that's those kinds of sessions are a blast for me, frankly.
The compositional process, from my point of view, doesn't necessarily, and I think it's the same when we work together for you, Ash, in a certain sense. I'll finish a piece in the studio, and then it may mean that I want to add voices to it later, or I want to do some other thing to slow down this part or drop it an octave. And having that amount of control, especially coming from the improvised world where I never have that amount of control, really feels magical. There was a reason I was fascinated by tape music early on. It was like to be able to physically slow things down and change it, to take multiple takes, to really get into that fine-grained listening of overtones on this or maybe a little more pronounced, is really special. And to do that as opposed to walking into a room and playing a concert, which is also really special. But this has a different kind of magic to me, and I love being in the studio for that reason. I mean, I think for me, some of this is generational. I think I'm the tail end of a generation before you that grew up pretty deeply involved in the object. I mean, that was the trip to the record store was like the monthly pilgrimage into Portland, coming back with LPs, coming back with CDs. There was an attachment to the object there that's slightly different. I think that's what makes the book special for me, actually, is it's a way of putting a hand out to people that may not know your work and say, like, here it is, not as a promotional tool, but as a way for us to have a conversation. Here's this thing I made. I want to give it to you in this loving way so that you can experience this because it's important to me. And we may never know each other, we may never have met or will meet, but this is something for you.
Something that also brought me a lot of satisfaction in this process is that you and Sound American really understood that it wasn't just going to be, an off-the-shelf book. Like, we put care and love into those pages and into their tactility and into their specificity and the images and where they are. And there's a lot of love poured into that object. And even though we're not going to get to meet everybody who ever holds one of those books, I think when they hold that, the materiality of it, the tactility of it, the way that those notions of the palpable and touch sensation then relate to the way people listen and the way maybe particularly music like mine really enters into the body. I think that was a really beautiful link to explore, and did kind of ground you know, the digital streamingness of the release, like, and it's that the kind of ephemerality of that into this like beautiful distillation of like, here also it's small, it's precious, or it's not like overly precious in it being finicky, but it's like there's a delicacy to it. There's a fragility. There's an attention to detail in that book that I think really captures a lot of the spirit of the project too.
You also attach memory to it, so yes, there's the object now, but there will be that object 20 years from now when someone pulls it off their shelf. Maybe they're moving to a new apartment and it brings back emotions of when they received it and the first time listening and the first time looking through it or letting a friend borrow it. And that just lets all of the notions of what you're making kind of seep deeper into individuals' lives. I think can be a really powerful thing.
Being in conversation with Nate about this question of accessibility has been really interesting for me, actually. I've been very concerned with that concept, but have felt with these scored pieces in concert halls, it's like if you fit in that sweet spot of an audience who feels like they can access either that room or that particular mode of listening, I think there's a lot to be discovered for you in that listening experience or in an engagement with a concert piece of mine. But these bigger works, I find, like from across ages to across kind of backgrounds, there's a lot of ways I can invite people in. The way those projects aren't accessible is in their ephemerality, in the way that you have to be there, in the flesh and in the skin to really be able to take in what it has to offer. And so I think what you're talking about, the small kid, the burgeoning weirdos out there and wanting to send sustenance to them sort of through the years and through the airways, that's inspiring to me, actually. And I think it's given me more motivation to take recording seriously and to think through the archive, not just in some kind of Western notion of importance and posterity, but really as an act of generosity. And so I think it sort of tuned my imagination toward thinking about different instantiations of a work. So if there is a live experience and there is a recorded experience, maybe they're not exactly identical, but both are really important and have something to kind of offer.
Hi, I'm Clifton Joey Guidry, and I made my album using Logic at the beginning of the pandemic in my mom's media room, using one Audio Technica mic and a lot of stress. And I reached out to some friends, especially Marat, who helped mix and master the whole album, and sent it to many friends and got opinions, and yeah, received a lot of support, and that's how I made my album. I released it on Bandcamp. I did a pre-sale of the track Shut the Fuck Up and Listen, and that got a lot of really good traction a month ahead of the release. And my friend Allie and Olivia, they both helped me with marketing and social media and everything. So it was a very much a community effort of getting this baby out there.
Basically, since I started engineering, in the early mid aughts, I've worked pretty much exclusively with what you could very broadly describe as art music clients or artists. And within that, it can range anything from a Baroque ensemble to really out contemporary jazz or new music and everything in between. For new music, I see a range of albums that are really led by a composer. And a lot of composers, the goal is just to get a accurate representation of their piece down. And the goal is kind of to make sure the notes and the rhythms are clean and everything's there, and it's a quality representation of their compositional intention. And so, that kind of maybe leans more towards the archival documentary style approach to a recording. We've definitely done a lot of projects that are artist or ensemble led where they've commissioned, often it's obviously we're trying to spotlight what that artist, what that performer, what that ensemble wants to say about the repertoire and what they're doing with it. And then, I've also done projects which are, great, where it really is about doing something very specific with the sound of that record and with, making it a thing that is unlike anything else, whether it's something with the sound of it or some concept of how the album is sequenced and how the pieces kind of interact with each other across the duration of the record. But really seeing it as a unique piece of art and not just a conduit through which you can experience this other thing, whether that's the composition or, a live performance that you happen to be experiencing through a record. And similarly, I do a lot of jazz recording as well, and there's a similar kind of range of intentions there, whether it's more just about capturing one particular live performance that's improvisatory, or you're really trying to create a thing that will go on and have a life of its own that's maybe totally independent of that artist's performances, live performance practice or any other things that might come out of a collaboration between the musicians that are involved. It varies a lot from project to project, and I've even with the same artists, I've worked on albums that have different roles in their career and in their artistic output.
Ryan's setup at Octaven with its beautiful Steinway is ideal for finding the possibilities of fine tuning. It is just a safer space in a lot of ways, but also a different space qualitatively and creatively. We feel like we can try things and fail if that happens also, but just to have the freedom to experiment a little bit more, to refine things, and to get to the heart of what a composer wants in our view, and to the essence of a collaboration. And because I'm also a producer, I know what can be possible in post-production and how I can layer the elements of a recording and know how I'm going to assemble them in the end, very roughly. So having that analytic approach is, it's a good method of learning. It gets you more intimate and more familiar with all the aspects of the piece. And so you know what you really want to show to an audience when you're opening it up to the public.
I've learned so much from the process of making this album. I kind of wish I could do it again. I'll do it again with a different set of pieces. having played the pieces on my album in concerts for several years before I recorded them, I was bringing them into the world, but in a more ephemeral way, that someone would hear it in a concert and have that impression and then leave, and they remember liking that piece. I haven't achieved with recording yet the feeling of performance, and they're very different feelings. I'm aiming to play exactly what's in the score, but also to do something more than that. And if I do miss something, if there is a mistake, I actually kind of like having, if it's not something too bad, I kind of like the idea that is now in amber, that's like encapsulated and it's more human, where I think that there is so much recording that we do that is just so not human, and trying to be perfect and trying to be just do exactly what's in the score, and it's not possible. And I don't, as a musician, I do want perfection, but I know that I'm not going to get it, and I know that I'm not going to play the same way in a recording session that I would on a concert stage. And so we shouldn't try to equate them. We should try to make them different experiences. I think I actually, from the very beginning of the commissioning project, thought that I would record at some point, but that was very nebulous, and I didn't know when that would happen. And because I always had in my head that I had to do everything at once, I didn't know at what point, like, as many pieces had come in as would make an album. And I've still for over 10 years been having discussions with different people about writing pieces for singing violist. And I'm thinking, when do I start a second album? Well, I'm still pretty tired from making this one, and I'm not sure yet how I want to do that, but I think I would much rather have it be sort of a rolling experience. And if I have one a year from now, I will record that and it'll be there, and sort of trusting, as I did with the first album, that it would be a cohesive album, not worrying about doing one by one, and eventually I think it will all make sense.
This different frame of listening for a recording versus going to a concert and experiencing the ephemeral performance, I think they can be reconciled in some way if you capture some feeling of spontaneity in what you lay down on tape, but also know that it's there to be artistically messed with, if that's what you feel is appropriate. Then it can really be there in the moment when you're listening to a recording, no matter how far removed you are from the actual session date. So I think there are bridges between the experiences.
And probably the best recordings are the ones that are able to capture that and have the spontaneity. And I think I learned that from recording with the ensemble rather than recording by myself. Like the ones where we're having fun. I think, for example, Pulse, Steve Reich, that was such a special piece when we performed it at Carnegie Hall. And then we had a performance right like January 19th or 20th, 2017. That was a really difficult day. And I don't think it was as successful a performance because it was such a joyful piece and hard to play. But then when we came back and recorded it, and without a conductor, which we had done with two different great conductors 2 different times, but playing it as a chamber ensemble piece and coming back, and I think we were seated in a circle for the recording, and it just felt, that was one of the most, like, where we did reconcile the perfection of recording and the joy of performing.
George Lewis's recording was especially interesting because we were including live recordings and studio recordings, and we wanted to highlight the excitement of a live performance while making a uniform audio standard. and also just using everything at our disposal to make each performance the best that it could be. So there was some internal editing that we used for the live performances on there. And we also got George in the studio to record a trombone piece. So it's, every project is different, but you want to go as deeply into the style and the requirements of the style. And to have the composer on hand is extremely important for that. I think just knowing what the end stylistic goal is, and knowing generally what you want the dramatic and musical experience of listening to be, you can make appropriate decisions.
I feel so comfortable at Octaven now. I see the books on the wall. I see the particular microphones that always make me smile. I see Ryan in the booth, and I just feel at home. Where in the past year, I actually am at home and doing recordings with my husband, and yet there's just such a different thing. It's elevated to be at Octaven and to be in that environment. It's beautiful. It's there's something intangible about it.
I recorded my second album, Metafogoce, in 2015 and released it in 2016. All sessions were recorded at Octaven Audio with Ryan Strieber session producing, editing, mixing, and mastering. Jacob Greenberg provided extra post-production support. The album was released as a digital-only release, making a few press copies as CDs. This made it harder than I had originally anticipated to get a lot of promotion, but mostly I did grassroots reach outs and social media for promotion of the album. Metafogoce was released on Tundra, which is the small independent record label, which is an offshoot of New Focus Records, run by Dan Lapel, and Tundra is run by International Contemporary Ensemble.
I kind of gather all my friends, like my instruments together, and think, which sounds do I want in this world? And how open is this world? Or how close to the speaker is it? And based on that, I gather either my microchord or my TR-707 or Chaos Pad and my pedal board and figure out exactly how they're all going to talk to each other and how they're going to relate to each other. I usually work in Logic as a DAW, because I kind of just need a place to house the effects that I'm externally doing. So I don't really need Max or anything like that. And then I just start putting them together based on a vaguely succinct feeling, maybe this feeling of, I think this is about loss. How can I follow through with that? And then over the course of working on it, I'll figure out, well, this isn't really about loss of a loved one. This is kind of about loss of a past version of myself. And really commit to the nuances of that and think about how I can succinctly say that in a lyric, what words precisely represent that. And then I'll start singing things that seem to fit and not bother what's happening in the music. So that in the end, it's a collaboration between my instruments, my friends, and myself. But not only myself in this present tense, but like myself in a past version as well. Thinking, if I were him before, what would he think of me now? And if I were me later, what would I think of me now trying to speak about him back then? So it gets kind of messy and all over the place, but the thing that helps really focus it down is using Logic, and just putting all these things right next to each other and helping them build each other up and flesh each other out. I kind of just put things out on Bandcamp right now, like put them onto the internet, send them to my friends, and just let it do whatever it's going to do. Which recently has been, they go further and further, which is more shocking. But I kind of intentionally haven't put things on Spotify yet, just because I get the feeling that when I do, I want to make sure that I know exactly how I'm presenting things to people before I put it on such a massive platform. So I think I like for now that it's in a place that's public and all my music's free. It's just kind of in like a loosely kept secret place that if you wanted to dig and find, you could totally find it, and it's linked to everywhere. But it's not Spotify. It's not going to just come to you.
The title Palabras means words, but also for me it means to have your voice heard. Palabras en alto means to raise your voice, to say something meaningful. That kind of meaning is also imprinted in the music. You know, there are places where actually Wendy has to, to scream, stuff like that, right? And do these kind of crescendos to a high point. And that has to do with, say something. But when you say something, say it with your soul, right? And like, do you really mean it? And so everyone can hear it and say something meaningful.
What you say about the title is such a metaphor for creating anything, and the poem is about the struggle of creating something, and I think I read it as the poet not necessarily having control over the words that are coming out, but trying to control them and corral them, and these awful things like that I need to put all together, and finally I get them in one place. And the feeling of the piece, also of playing the piece, is that there are so many intricate details and so many things for both viola and voice that part of it each time is the process of putting that together, that it's in practice, it's kind of different each time, and it's tenuous, but trying to make something cohesive out of it and out of all of these words or notes or whatever any artist decides to use as the means for creation. That as we're trying to control all of these seemingly uncontrollable things, somehow you end up with something on the other side that makes sense and works.
What caught my attention of the text is the phonetic of the word, of the words, the consonants, their vibration, their color, their attack, and most of the piece is about this interaction between the voice and the instrument becoming one-third instrument, a third instrument that doesn't exist, and they're always trying to converge. They're always not only trying to dialogue, but they're trying to fuse, to become one. It's about words, but whose words? Is it my words, your words? It's not one single thing. So the words at the end do not mean anything, or it can mean many things.
Velas globos pinchana. Surbeles la sangre y tuétanos. ¡Se! ¡Calas, capalas, písalas! Gallo. Galán. Cocinero. Desplúmalas. Destrípalas. Toro. Güey. quese when todas